Hey, so this is just going to be a video on why I use the Sith logo and other paraphernalia for my channel when I talk about atheism. So it's going to be a lot of things, here mostly talking about atheism, but also talking about Star Wars a lot in this video. For those of you that don't know, I recently made a video about why I think Star Wars sucks under Disney, and I absolutely believe that. But I used to like Star Wars quite a bit, especially, certain elements of the original trilogy, and actually some things about the extended Star Wars universe. In the time period between the prequels and when Disney bought Star Wars from George Lucas. Um, one of my favorite offshoots of the extended universe is the Darth Bane trilogy, Darth Plagueis, and just the general, I guess you could say, series of the Sith. They even made one called the Sith book, Sith Code book. I can't remember what it's called. A thing about the Sith, but I haven't read that one fully yet, though I've been meaning to kind of eventually read it. Like just the audio book is on like YouTube. Um, but anyways, they're really good, and they kind of build off a lot of elements, though I guess more of the prequels even than the original trilogy. In that they build off, one thing that was done very right in the prequels was kind of exploring the underlying philosophy and lore of the Jedi versus the Sith. And the way George Lucas actually constructed it, by many people will tell you, in the prequels they made Palpatine and the Sith much more empathetic characters in some ways than they did the Jedi. Because if you think about it, and for those of you that, haven't watched the prequels, I apologize, or haven't watched any of Star Wars, this isn't going to make a lot of sense to you, especially if you just started watching Star Wars after Disney took over. But, especially in the prequels, the Jedi, have the big Jedi temple, and they're portrayed as being, you know, almost kind of like the ruling religion of the time, kind of like almost the Catholic Church or something, or, and again, that's a little bit of a stretch, I know, to relate it directly to religion, but to be honest, whenever I watch it, I have kind of found myself relating it to religion and atheism, because the Jedi are a ruling, powerful elite that have ruled for thousands of years, and they won a war between the Sith and the Jedi that took place in the Darth Bane era when the Sith were legion, and there was many, many Sith, and then Darth Bane destroyed the Sith legions and became the sole Sith Lord and founded the Rule of Two, where there would only be two Sith Lords, one master and one apprentice throughout the ages, you know. And, but the Jedi are portrayed as being extremely set in their ways. They're loyal to the government and Republic under almost any circumstances. They're shown to be very uncompromising, and they're willing to do some killing and stuff when it suits them. They're not the bad guys, but they're good guys that you don't feel a lot of empathy towards, because you see a lot of flaws in how they do with, their policies and how they execute, different orders from the part of the Republic, and their loyalty to the Jedi, their loyalty to the Republic, even when it does things that might be wrong, like the Civil War against the Separatists in Episode 2 and 3. And, really the way George Lucas made it, if you look at it from Palpatine's perspective and maybe Anakin's perspective and even Dooku's perspective, you actually find yourself being very empathetic with him. And maybe that's one reason I like the prequels, is because I tend to empathize more with the villains than with the heroes in a lot of movies and books and TV shows. But the Darth Bane trilogy and Darth Plagueis explore that even further. Darth Plagueis was Darth Plagueis the Wise, as Palpatine mentions in Episode 3, and he was Palpatine's master. And that's exactly what Darth Plagueis, the book, is about. Is it explores Darth Plagueis' life as when he was the Sith Lord, and when he found Palpatine on Naboo and took Palpatine as his apprentice. And it's very, very good. One of my favorite books ever, maybe. Because there's a lot of themes explored in it that are explored very well. There's a lot of very interesting quotes, about the nature of good and evil in it. And one of my favorite quotes of all is, it's actually in a doo-doo film that I posted here, that they actually have it kind of dramatized a little, where Plagueis is giving a little speech to Palpatine, and he's like, "Remember why the Sith are more powerful than the Jedi, Sidious, because we are not afraid to feel. We embrace the spectrum of emotions, from the heights of transcendent joy to the depths of hatred and despair. Fearless, we welcome whatever path the dark side sets us on, and whatever path it lays before us." And then he goes on for a while longer, but that was probably my favorite part of it. And reason I kind of almost take parts of the Sith code kind of seriously, and especially as I've gotten older in recent years of life, is that I'll admit I relate certain aspects of the Sith Jedi conflict to the conflict between atheism and Christianity, or just general secularism and religion. And I know that's a little bit stupid. Okay, I get it. I know, and that's a bit nerdy. It's a bit dorky. It's a bit stupid. Okay, but the thing is there actually are some parallels that I think are worth noting in this, and one of which is that, okay, compare how the Jedi, ruled the Republic for thousands of years. In the Darth Bane era, they basically unilaterally ruled the Republic and in a big Jedi temple, and that's what it's literally called, the Jedi Temple. And they squashed and oppressed any other opposition after they defeated the Sith. I mean, most notably the Sith, but especially any other rival factions within, the Jedi Order, like Dark Jedi. Well, basically, this is kind of how religion has been in place for thousands of years. Christianity and Islam essentially won many, many thousands of years ago, and they kind of have had their way of things for the last couple thousand years. I mean, Islam came a little later than Christianity, but I mean, they very much have been pretty efficient at stamping out, most forms of secularism and any real opposition to them for a long time until recent years, and also, there's one interesting thing as well, one comparison that I tend to draw, and this may be very weird to some people and probably won't make sense to almost anyone who is not an atheist that comes from a religious background, and also someone who hasn't read the Star Wars Sith lore very carefully, because otherwise you'll wonder what the hell I'm talking about. But the thing is I kind of relate the nature of atheism and the nature of secularism and even the nature of nihilism a little bit to the conflict between, Christianity, Islam, just general absolutist religious thinking, pure black and white type religious thinking. And, also I relate the way that atheists kind of organize and the way they work very much more independently than the way religions often work in large groups towards a single purpose. And here's how I relate it to the Jedi and to the Sith. Okay, the Sith, the reason Darth Bane founded the Rule of Two is that by nature, the Sith were all meant to be very independent beings. The Sith, the driving force, as is written in the Sith code, which I don't know if this is going to fit in my camera, so I apologize if it doesn't here. I have this up in my bathroom. Here is the Sith code here. I will just hold it up for 1 minute, and then I'm going to just take it back down here and then just recite to you what it actually is so that you don't have to read it. The Sith code goes, peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. And obviously, you have to take this quote with a grain of salt, just like you have to take the Jedi code with a grain of salt. Obviously, it's fictional. It's based off science fiction and a bunch of other goofy stuff. I mean, for gosh sakes, this is a universe in which, the most powerful being in the universe is like a little green guy who George Lucas himself said his inspiration for Yoda was the love child of Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy. So, obviously take it with a grain of salt, but I think there is actually some legitimate comparisons to be drawn. And to tell you the truth, I draw a little bit of inspiration from reading the Sith books and Star Wars. And the reason is because as an atheist, very often you have to function on your own and independently, because there are not major atheist organizations and movements in the same way that there are churches and other groups. As atheists, we are very often all on our own. I mean, there are many non-religious people and people call themselves atheists out there, but they rarely organize into groups. And in that sense, it's very similar to the Sith in Star Wars. In fact, in the Sith, that's why Bane founded the Rule of Two, because the large Sith organizations under Khan, and I believe his name was Emperor Vejuvit, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing it, one of the earlier Sith Lords, and others always would be too competitive with each other because their independence and strength is what made the Sith so incompatible with each other, and they would often fight with each other too much. And in many ways, I think the same is kind of true about atheists a little bit. I mean, the truth is, many atheists, in order to sometimes, especially just in the modern era, in order to be going against the church, in order to go against what is the majority way of thinking, even if you're right, usually you have to be at least somewhat both smart and at least a little bit, independent-minded and willing to go against the grain on occasion. And people that are that way by nature have a tendency to not necessarily always be the most cohesive in groups. And really, I think there is a legitimate comparison to be made between these two. And sometimes I draw inspiration from the from the Sith lords like Darth Plagueis, Darth Bane, and Darth Sidious, in terms of how they are independent rogues. In terms of how I have to be an independent rogue very often as an atheist, especially in my particular life, because I'm the only atheist in my family. I am one of a very, very small number from the religious school that I come from. Many days I feel like from my particular, walk of life, I am completely, like I'm the only atheist of anyone that I really know. And I'm certainly the only atheist of anyone in my life that actually takes most views with a high degree of seriousness, Like, reading Nietzsche, reading Schopenhauer, reading Hitchens, reading Dawkins, reading, the list goes on of atheists that I continue to read and try to gain my knowledge of, as well as studying former religious texts and, C.S. Lewis and, Barak Lurie, John Gray, I believe is his name, who wrote the book, The Seven Types of Atheists, and people whom I oppose so I can further refine my views. The bulk of my opposition to religion, I'm well informed about Christianity. The bulk of my opposition to religion was formed in the 18 years of indoctrination that I had in the first part of my life. I went to a religious school for a very long time and took the issue very seriously when I was in it. So it wasn't just suddenly one day I just met a Christian I didn't like. It's like, oh, well, screw you. I don't like none of this religious crap. And I suddenly became this angry atheist out of nowhere. But anyways, going back to how it relates to the Sith lore and all, I think there's a kind of an interesting comparison between those two. And I know you have to take this all with a grain of salt because obviously the Sith are the bad guys, and there are really no Sith or Jedi or dark side of the Force or good side of the Force. And it's Star Wars at its heart. It's kind of stupid anyway. So, especially since Disney took over and has made everything about Star Wars stupid. So, but anyways, I genuinely, one thing I do think that is legitimate, that I draw inspiration from certain elements of the Sith code are the kind of Nietzschean aspects of the philosophy of the Sith code. Because in the Sith code, ultimately, it revolves around the idea that we are all on our own in this world. And the only thing that will sometimes get you through life is your own passion, strength, and resolve. And, however you draw on that anger, that love, the different emotions that are within you, that is the thing you have to use to power yourself through a lot of situations in life. And I think that is often true for a lot of people, Christian, atheist, everyone. Ultimately, to some extent, we're all on our own in this world. Occasionally people will help you, some people will hurt you, but you have to manage your own affairs. And there is even some virtue, virtue in the selfishness, Some might even relate this a little bit to objectivism and Ayn Rand's way of thinking. I find Ayn Rand, I don't agree with a lot of what she said, but I find her very interesting, But the reasons, I guess, and here's like some of my reasoning behind that. Ultimately, for one, like taking your own personal life into account, if you can help other people with relationships, you can help other people with money, and you can get help from other people in these things. But if you can't manage your own affairs independently in life, there's going to be a lot of limitations as to how much you can do to help anyone in any of those affairs. The reason I talk to incels and people like that is partially because I understand their situation from having been in the same situation and being 34 years old and never having really dated much thus far in life. But I can't really, there's a limit to how much I could ever advise incels because again, I haven't had any relationships, And also, sometimes I wonder about my capacity to be, even a financial advisor someday, because that's kind of the general world I'm in, is banking and, finance. But if you can't manage your own money, how, and some days I have plenty of troubles managing my own. Though it's not really a question of not knowing what to do with it, it's more a question of the discipline and the self-discipline that's needed to manage it. Because at the end of the day, one thing about managing your money is really simple. If you spend more than you make, you will have money problems. Okay, that much reigns true from everyone from investment bankers to the homeless guy on the streets, But my point just is about this is ultimately we all have to take care of our own affairs, and to some extent that is our main responsibility to others and to ourselves and to the world, is to manage our own affairs and manage them well. Because if you don't manage your own affairs well, you will be a problem to other people around you. Okay, and to yourself, Now you can help others. I'm not saying this is where, obviously there are problems with the Sith code and why you shouldn't take it too seriously, or I think you shouldn't take objectivism too seriously either. And that, there are things that I think that can be done from, trying to help others. I think there's things to be gained in your own life and helping others. I think it just makes you happier too to be able to, participate and be a part of other people's lives. But ultimately, I do think that all comes secondary to managing your own affairs in life, in a way that is also beneficial to others. For instance, one thing I am a big believer in, I believe that, the number one thing, in terms of trying to, I guess take care of your own life well, is taking care, whatever you do for work or your job or your career, whatever. To some extent, as long as that is always going to be one of the biggest commitments you have in your life, or whatever it is. Even if you're a homemaker, whether you're an investment banker, a doctor, or whether you're a janitor, that is still, and how you do the job and how you treat your coworkers and your customers, that's a 60 to 70% or more of how we spend all of our lives. And how you do it matters a lot. Same goes with school, same goes with all those things. And to some extent, it might be a little bit selfish to invest a lot of time and energy into those things, but also to some extent, to not take care of those affairs can be incredibly dangerous to you and those around you. When a person doesn't do their job right, like when the Secret Service agents who didn't do their job right don't protect the president well, the results can be catastrophic for all of us sometimes. And that really is what that came down to. Some people, either within the Secret Service or within higher levels of the Secret Service Administration, Department of Homeland Security, did not do their jobs well, and they just about plunged the United States and the world into anarchy by letting some random 20-year-old kitchen staff worker assassinate a potential presidential candidate and former president. This is kind of, like I said, going back to the Sith code, the Sith are much more focused on the strength and power of the individual, and, individual ambition is heavily promoted within the Sith. Individual thinking, individual aspirations, and that's where I relate to the Sith code and where I take it in some ways very, very seriously even. Plus it's entertaining to read the Sith books, obviously. It's relatable, and I just love certain aspects of reading the Darth Bane books and all, and Darth Plagueis, and I don't know. Those are really well-written books, by the way. Even if you're not a fan of most of what I'm saying here, if you like Star Wars at all, you will like the Darth Bane and Darth Plagueis trilogy. But anyways, kind of that's the main point of the overall video here, is that ultimately, the reason I kind of incorporate the Sith into my channel and the Sith emblem and the ways of Sith thinking is because at the end of the day, we are all on our own in this world, and, be us atheist, Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, or whatever, we all have to manage our own affairs, and we all have to fight our own fights, and we can help others and others can help us, but that's a big part of what I believe even as an atheist, even though I relate to other atheists and I do want to, I guess you could say, support those who are also supporting similar causes to me. At the end of the day, there is a limit to what I believe is even productive to try to get involved with atheist organizations or to make my whole life about the cause of atheism or whatever. Because I don't even think atheists do well in large groups, and I don't even know if I want to be a part of a large atheist group, And ultimately, too, My main, at least thus far in my life, my main concern in my atheist views is mostly just trying to inform myself, promote those views to those around me in my life, and other than that, not necessarily to try to force my views onto other people. And maybe I'm not being as activist as I should be. Maybe I am, being too, I don't know, too weak about it. But there's been many times in my life where if I had just gone headfirst in, I would have regretted it. I mean, heck, if I had followed the pushings of the religious people that brought me up when I was a kid, the religious fundamentalists, they would have pushed me into the world of religion of trying to be like a preacher or a theologian or something along those lines. Early on in life, and I'm glad I didn't listen to them. And at the time, I thought, well, maybe I'm a selfish person, for not listening to them. But looking back on it in hindsight, I'm pretty happy about that. And even as far as atheism and philosophy goes, I recognize that I want to continue to develop my views on philosophy and continue to expand it. Maybe someday get a degree in philosophy. Maybe someday make it a major aspect of my life and career. But I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm only 34 years old, and a lot of twists and turns have happened thus far in life that I never would have foreseen. And I don't know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is. And in the meantime, to be honest with you, I've got plenty of problems as it is in life. For the last 2.5 years, I have been just through the ringer in my career, like I've never been through before. I mean, again, not to just sit here and rant about my life, but to be honest with you, I had 5 jobs not work out for me in the 2.5 years that I was not in Columbus. That's more jobs than I went through in all my life prior to then. And these weren't little jobs either. These were big boy jobs. These are full ones that required years of experience and were hard to even qualify for, within my field of finance, and for one reason or another, they just burned out, some of them before I even got into the job role, and some of them after I just been in the job role for like a month or two, so it took a toll on me, financially, professionally, physically, psychologically, And, when you can't even take care of your basics in life, you have to be kind of cautious about going out into new ventures, And that's also one reason, FYI, this channel sucks. I mean, it's not an excuse, I know, but to be honest with you, I mean, there's been times over the last few years I wondered if my life was going to swallow me up, entirely. And maybe here, moving all the way from Columbus, Ohio to Phoenix, Arizona, will begin where I can finally begin to stabilize things and put some actual elements of quality into this channel that have been sorely lacking for a long, long time, But for now, the next few weeks, the month of August is posed to be a pretty busy month at work, so I wouldn't count on it for at least a few more months at least. But we'll just see. Life, you never know how it's going to go. But anyways, like I said, I know this is probably a weird video. Probably most people don't know a whole lot about the underlying elements of the Sith lore versus the Jedi Code, and would he be even less likely to relate it to, atheism and Christianity, or secularism versus religion on the whole. I remember once coming across, I think it was Quora or a Reddit thread or something like that, where somebody else had been along this line of thinking. They're like, hey, is it just me, or does anyone else notice there's a lot of correlations between like the Jedi Code and the Sith Code and religion and atheism, and how religion has a big temple and atheists are often on their own and they're renegades and something like that. And then the main responses in the comments were like, dude, you need to stop reading so much Star Wars. You need to get a life and get out of the world of Star Wars. That's probably the overall message here, probably the most important thing. But I've been trying to get a life for 34 years, so instead I find myself listening to Star Wars or whatever. But anyways, I guess that's all I have to say for now. So as usual, thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.